Okay, we'll start with Jean Delacroix's group, with Joseph Kibambe, Placide, Bob. That's going to be group 1. Then Kenny, Jeremy, Mike, John Collins. Third group will be Germain, Anani, Germain, Crispin, Kibao, Bernard, and Edward. The fourth group will be the group of Patrick, Simon, Larry, Dan, Brian, and Paul. The next group will be Guylain, David, Vincent, Raphael, and Peter. And the last group will be Jim, Moses, John Hamilton, John MacDonald, etc. So you know the order and you know who comes after who. And I don't have to take the floor again. So Jean Delacroix's group has the floor. Please go ahead. Good afternoon, dear brothers. For us, in his presentation of this morning, Brother Patrick was quite consistent, coherent in terms of what was said today and what we heard yesterday. So there is consistency there. What he said was interesting because it was not just about the theory, but it actually was very, very concrete. We even had a nice, minute of concrete calculations, which we enjoyed. Now, we've heard a lot of speeches here, but unfortunately, things don't seem to change much. Yesterday, we talked about the founder, Riken. We also talked about what the Holy Spirit helped him achieve. Riken wanted to touch the children, and particularly the poorest children in the UK and in the US. The Institute for the Marginalized is one clear expression of that. And we believe in the group that in the past years we've done wonderful things, but the last years have been quite static, unfortunately. There are a lot of new poor people out there and a lot more marginalized people out there. And we would fail to be faithful to Riken's spirit if we are not able to somehow do something for those people. And Rich yesterday insisted on the need for us not just to talk, but also to do things. And we wanted this morning in the group to insist on that. Common life together is how we can be stronger, and that is how we can then really start looking outwards and helping those poor and marginalized people. And the subject today that we're looking at is extremely important for us. There is no contradiction between being together and being open to the other. We need to go and meet other people in the spirit of the gospel, and we must be able to admit it is difficult to do that. We must admit that there are differences. We all are different from various points of view, from our personal identity, from our cultural background, our national background. And this is a source of differences, but we should go beyond those differences. We should be able to push through those obstacles and really develop a genuinely multicultural project and work as a community able to accept Christ or not. And if we are able to do that, then we'll go beyond those cultural, ethnic, or tribal divergences. Those divergences are actual gifts from God. No one has decided that he or she would be born in a particular country or a particular ethnic group. It's like a field full of flowers. The more varied the flowers, the more beautiful the garden. And the same goes for any community. So we said this morning, again, on the basis of our motto, in harmony, small things grow. Well, the same goes for music. The more varied the instruments, the better the tune, and the nicer the music. So I think that if we can do that, we will achieve great things. However, if a rose tree doesn't flower anymore, the gardener has to do something and possibly prune that tree to help it flower again. The same goes for an instrument. If it is out of tune, it has to be helped. And that is how you can start growing rose trees that won't just be full of thorns, but also full of flowers. We need to learn from that. We need to change. If any brother is somehow losing his way, we need to help him come back to the right path. And do that, as I said earlier, giving thanks to God for the diversity that we have. Diversity also involves accepting people for what they are, in good and in bad. Everybody has defects, and the group this morning insisted on this. We cannot just hope to have people with us that are perfect. We talked about 3 Franciscan brothers who became priests on the same year. The regional general thought, okay, everything is going to be fine. These 3 people can live together. There are 3 Franciscans. They spend a month together, and after months, they had to be separated almost physically because they could not get along. So we need to be able to learn from that sort of situation and be respectful of each other. To do that, we have to start from our hearts, but also take into account our whole beings and start changing ourselves from the heart onwards towards the rest of our bodies. And we know that we need to be there to protect our brothers. We should consistently and systematically do that internally within our communities, but also outside of our communities. This is a call that we have to answer to, and we have to pay attention. Am I a disciple of Cain in my life or not? This morning, various brothers were mentioned by the brother in his presentation. They were not disciples of Cain, but disciples of Jesus. And this should be a signal of alarm. We have to be able to understand that we are not static human beings. Any human being changes over time. We need to continue changing, evolving, being brothers. And those who have must think about those who don't have. Those who have nothing should not somehow reject those who have simply because they have. Let's refer also to the booklet, page 71 in English, 77 for the French. We talk there about an international bureau or an international office. And it is said in the document that the chapter is going to define what is a Xaverian community. We said in the group this morning that we need flexibility there. Not every community goes and has lunch at the same hour. Not everybody does every time in the same way. No, we have to think about all those brothers that we that may be far away from us, but sometimes work and act in a different way from us. And we believed in the group that this topic that we are looking at frightens some of us. Everybody talks about the concept of community. Everybody has a different understanding of what that is, and we believe that we need to see the community as a space where we can transform. We come there with our masks, and there must come a point in time when we take our masks off through conflict sometimes, possibly, but sometimes even that is good. And if we can lose our masks, then we can start moving forward. We believe that communities are also spaces where you give something and you get something in return. So we need to do that and see our communities as spaces where we can give, receive, and accompany and be accompanied, whatever our age. Sometimes, at a certain age, somebody mentioned in a group Bernard Philbot, a brother, and they were talking, the two of them. And brother Bernard Philbot looked at his watch and said, "Sorry, but I need to go and visit my spiritual accompanier." That other brother was very young and was quite impressed to see that even at quite an elderly stage in your life, you still need to be supported and you need spiritual support. And we also looked this morning at the Bible. We have said that fraternity or brotherhood is something we've lost since Cain and Abel and since Jeremiah was killed by his own brothers. And other examples of that can be found to show that we are not de facto brothers, and being brothers is difficult. Being brothers also means going through a sort of conversion process, going back to our origins, and it is only through conversion that we can become brothers. In Africa, there are no cousins, we're all brothers. Introducing someone as a cousin is discrimination to us. The word brother is the word we use all the time, but are we really brothers? Our fear is that brothers remain just that, just a word that you use to describe someone. We need to be more than just, brothers on paper. We need to become real, genuine brothers with everything that entails. We also said this morning that once a brother has responsibilities, he tends to forget or even to criticize his community of origin. You're sent as a missionary somewhere, and you sometimes forget where you come from. And the founder said clearly that he would only go to the US as a full member of his own community. I think that is an example that we need to follow. When in a community we look only at the social project, it is a problem. When you look only at the life project, it is also a problem. And those problems will always be there, but we need to be able to find ways to deal with them. Looking at the diamond crown, we say if the diamond moves away from the crown, it might be because the crown has been unable to retain it through love. When a group becomes community, everyone needs to know that he will have to make sacrifices to make sure life together is possible. And for that reason, we need to define what is a community, which must be more than a common house where people sleep and eat. To finish off, we said sacrifice is also something that is very much associated to culture. No culture is better than another culture, and everything in every culture has potentially something good to contribute to the common culture. That means we need to be able to shed what is bad in our own culture and replace it maybe with good aspects of other cultures, particularly the culture of Jesus. We're all baptized, we're sons of the same Father, and we say that in our Father. But that has to be more than just a prayer, and we have to really think about the meaning of the words. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph, and good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
When our group met, we were trying to get an idea where we should go with the conversation. And it might be a point of direction. We weren't sure how much we should respond to Patrick's presentation and/or the questions on 70, 71. So we sort of did a blending, I think, of that. One of the likes that we had at the beginning was the piece of everybody saying something about yesterday. Everybody said a word, a phrase, what described it. And we found that helpful because it was linking up this process. Yesterday wasn't just put on the bookshelf. We're connecting it to what we talked about today, and God willing, where we're going tomorrow, etc. So one phrase that jumped out for some of us was the word being. And Patrick's talk, he seemed to stress that a lot. We cannot do everything. We may do a lot of different things, but our being present, our being there with other people, those people observing us, maybe coming to be with us, is a significant thing. We felt we are all one, and one of the significant Eucharistic signs to me, how well we eat together, we break bread together, we hear one another. And then when we went to look in the booklet as such, we spent a lot of time talking about the sense of stewardship. And then this is where we were getting concerned. Are we talking about the booklet, or should we just go back to the morning presentation? So we need some clarification on that. The meaning of community, as Joseph just referenced, the ingredients of trust and mutuality and forgiveness at times. We talk as though everything is beautiful. Well, it is, but sometimes it's not, and we have to forgive one another and go forward in that. We addressed or talked about briefly intercultural needs, being equipped with language, a change in mentality, a reinvigoration of sharing with one another, but again, attentive listening, and how bring about exchanges that coordinate ministries internationally. And that was, it gets us spun off the idea of the stewardship. Is there a person or a group that would help discern the needs across the congregation? Do we post this project? Who would like to be involved with that? How does one discern what brothers are really appropriate to that? And we just don't need one type of brother in a ministry. One of the memories I had years ago of being at St. X, there were a lot of brothers. We all didn't attract every kid, but there was somebody among us that every kid seemed to identify with in some way. And when we do ministerial projects, I keep on thinking of that. The potential is there among us. We talked about the sense of the international community, the leadership team, what that might describe. We referenced some of the presentation from Congo and trying to discern exactly what that would mean. And I put it in secular language, I guess, but does one post a job description and then see what brothers are drawn to that? Or another model that's been around, maybe not perfect, but you're going to teach French. Oh, I don't know French. You're going to teach French. That type of thing. So which is the better? The piece I liked a lot in the Congo's reference, they confer as best as they can with each brother without stereotyping each other, or he'll never be interested, or he may be interested. How do we get that sense of the whole, that each piece of us is part of that? And in summary, and the other members of the group are going to share their comments with this, how address or actualize trust and mutuality in each culture, in each region? Does it mean different things, or how one expresses it? Forgiveness, the outreach to the marginalized, and Joseph alluded to this too, and at least I have found this. I've learned more in retirement about the variety of possibilities of using gifts and talents in a very short time. Things right outside my door. One is in community, listening to each other, but helping some brothers who don't seem at ease where they are. I love Louisville, but some of the guys don't love Louisville. So I try to listen with them about their life experience, so they have a mirror of how they've lived, how they've contributed, so they get some self-esteem that, you're still alive, brother, and you've done so much. You can translate some of that skill and experience. In the parish I just left, I stumbled on this, but it's everywhere, mentally ill people, outreach to the mentally ill, even with our students in the schools. Some come from families that are going through that. An associate shared with me that when he was a kid at St. X, the thing that helped him was that brothers listened to him because his mother was terribly mentally ill. And you think, all of us, when you say you have a class, who's thinking this kid is coming from that? Where's your homework? That holistic approach, I guess, is what I was thinking. The immigrants who are right at our doorsteps. And so one of the groups that we'd like to present or bring some focus to are the Xaverian associates who are growing in different areas. It's not a perfect program, but the awareness that through the associates, we tend to grow in an awareness of what we're bringing to others because they're telling us, we see this in you brothers. I may not know you personally, but I know the brothers. And the plus of that is that they help reinvigorate us because they're in love with ministry. And somehow or other they see in our Xaverian charism, however they may describe it, life-giving, gospel-centered living. And the existence and the presence of the associates, in a way, I think they're a gift from God because they keep us in touch, especially the older brothers, with the changing life, culture of people around us. You can get at your own age group talking wildly about life and forget there are people younger and older. Well, with the associates, we don't stagnate because they bring some fresh thoughts, some fresh energy. So, Mike, did you want to add something, or John, or Jerry?
I'd just like to add that I think our group didn't mention what you mentioned at the end of your presentation until you got to the end. And we did the same in our group. And I said, oh my God, this was an invigorating moment in our history, starting all the associates and the meetings and so forth. And the thing that comes strongly to me is what was mentioned in our group, how invigorating that was for those who went, and at the same time to realize maybe something we kind of lost the awareness of, namely that they saw in us a presence together, doing things that Christ has asked us to do, shown us the way, and they thanked us for that. And then we heard from them. So I'm glad that Michael McCarthy started us talking on that, and so that was a good takeaway for me.
I started talking about the associate program in light of animating our own communities. And at times I feel we talk around this, we beat it to death. And an experience with associates 2 weeks ago in Baltimore brought a breath of fresh air to some of our stale conversations when they shared excitement about their ministries with the incarcerated, when they shared their ministries with the poor in Baltimore City. They came alive and they filled the room with energy, and it filled me with hope. That's the one thing that I did share in the group. And the other thing that I've been hearing for these last 2 days is the word trust. when we talk about reanimating community. And I love the image that you gave, Patrick, of whose camp are we in? Are we in the camp of Cain, where we compete with one another, where we wear masks with one another? And Cain. And I was encouraged that if we could have each region in its own individual way continue to do community animation, that we continue to grow, as Brother Edward talked about in his State of the Congregation, to continue to grow as people who can share one another without the masks that you talked about. But it has to be something deliberate. It has to be something that's systemic. It can't be just a quick little workshop. It has to be something we devote ourselves to. And this is where I saw the associates fitting in there. You emphasize really clearly our preferential option for the poor, and we've been saying that for so long. And I looked at the camp of Cain, and I'm saying, well, what is holding us back? We've emphasized it for so long. And I ask myself that, Michael, what is holding you back? I address it when I go to visit Louisville. And we talked about that each person has to address in his own life some way to address the poor. It could be in the house, we've talked about that. It could be in the neighborhood, it could be in the school. Or for some who are still able and motivated to form a team, this international community, or to form some new outreach that's directly addressing the needs of the materially poor. That would give me so much hope as we move out of here. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup pour notre groupe.
Thank you very much. In our group, we started looking at two questions that Patrick asked us. What is it to be a Xaverian brother? We think you only are a brother when you finish your training and you become a brother. And then you move on to the next stage. You start living as a brother. And the community, of course, is more than just people living together. We come from different cultures, we have different characters, we have different behaviors. But what is absolutely central or crucial is to bear with each other. Just like we, again, mentioned Cain had a brother who had better results, I would say, and he actually sacrificed his brother. And he said, when asked the questions, I am not the guardian of my brother. So who are we? Are we Cain's or are we Abel's? And I think the answer is obvious. As a community, we really have to be brothers who not only bear with each other, but also support each other. And if anything is wrong with one of my brothers, I should talk to him. I should ask him what's wrong, rather than just do nothing. And I think that is what living as brothers means. It's paying attention to the others and not rejecting them. And of course, I mentioned supporting each other. Yes, if somebody is in pain, I should share in that pain. If somebody is in a situation of difficulty, I should not rejoice about that. I should share in the difficulty that he faces. When we look at the, we talked about the internovitiate. We said that we as Xaverian novices, we see that people are very surprised by how we behave, by the close relationship we have. For many other people and many other communities, when you're a novice, you're nobody. And you are taught by more experienced brothers, and we see them as brothers, but others in other community will see those brothers as almost, gods, out of touch and out of reach. And that's something that is specific to us. We have this proximity, and I think we need to continue doing that in our schools, in our communities. This is what makes us who we are. Then somebody in the group earlier when the brother talked about the money, the 500, the 300, we're not mathematicians, but obviously we can't behave like that. All of us should be, whatever our age, should be really able to share in and be real brothers. Now, services. Somebody in the group asked, what can the congregation do for me and what can I do for the congregation? Well, the answer to that is that I myself am a gift for the congregation. I give myself to the congregation. And I can contribute also to the congregation because I work, I'm a teacher, I'm a prefect, I'm a head. The money that I get doesn't go into my pocket, it goes to the congregation. And this is also something that is very surprising to people. Sometimes people tell me, or tell some of us, you're teaching, you don't even have 10 francs in your pocket. Well, that's what we are as brothers. We also talked this morning about our spiritual energy, prayer. Despite, the work that we do, we need to continue praying. We need also to continue practicing spiritual reading, and we need to share our faith. As soon as we start neglecting that, I think we drift away from genuine community life. So that's more or less the report that I wanted to share with you. If I have forgotten anything, I'm sure the colleagues from the group will add. I don't want to speak for too long. Thank you.
Just something on what my member, our secretary of the group, was sharing. We also talked about the formation. Brother Peter Campbell, despite being past the age of what we normally read in the breviary, in the fourth week, what he was presenting about the finances, he had that virtue of integrity. And we were saying that formation is a lifelong. Whether you are as young as Jermaine in the group, whether you are past Peter, you are still under formation. So whatever that you are doing, it is under formation. The other thing was also about, we were talking about that there is no distinction between being a Xaverian and living as a Xaverian. This was talked more about yesterday when Reg was presenting about the charismatic identity, the being and not having or doing. So whatever services that we render to the community, we need to know that we are Xaverians and we need to live as Xaverians.
Si je pouvais ajouter un tout petit peu à ce qui est dit par le frère.
If I can just add something to what's been said by the brothers with regard to a life in community. It's also been said that becoming a brother is an ongoing process which needs to be nurtured and developed. So it needs to be nurtured and developed through prayer, through meetings, through exchanges. Obviously, initial formation is one stage, but once you've gone through that stage, there are some individuals who perhaps lose their way within the community. They can only continue to be good members of the community by speaking to people, by developing friendships both inside and outside of the community. Thank you.
What impressed me in the sharing was the degree of openness and vulnerability that a number of the members of the group expressed, especially around the issue of the sharing of faith. I think there was an openness to really share some of the difficulties that we have with that particular source of support for our life as brothers, especially when the trust is broken and what is shared in the group appears on the street. So I think there was a real willingness to be vulnerable on that issue, as well as to say, all right, maybe we have to express what we mean by trusting each other and making a promise to keep in the group what is shared in the group.
Oui, il y a encore un problème que nous avions oublié.
There's another issue I think we've probably overlooked thus far. For example, mission. We believe that following initial formation, we believe that we should have the international novitiate where we have Congolese and Kenyan brothers, but once they've completed that, then they just disappear to the respective countries. We used to have brothers from the Congo and Kenya working in one another's country, but that's no longer the case. Brother Patrick mentioned this. In Congo, we have ministries, we have schools. We need Kenyans to come and work in Congolese, just as we have a need of a Congolese going to Kenya as well. And this would be a great source of pleasure if this were to happen.
Okay, after our meeting, Brother Guillain and I went through all the notes that were taken, and we drew out what we thought were some of the key ideas. Regarding stewardship, several of us said that the structures are already there for our finance offices, our advancement offices, and we should not duplicate. But the responsibility for advancement and finances should be shared with point persons and planning committees in each region. What we have now has to be shared, information has to be shared with key people who have some ability, some expertise in each of our regions. In all of this, credibility and transparency are necessary to create confidence in whoever is doing this work. They must account for everything constantly, both morally and technically. That is, they have a moral responsibility, and they have to render accurate accounting, accountability in the financial sense as well. As far as finding sources of support for our works, we have to keep looking to find people to support the good work we do. It was pointed out that many donors in Europe are devoting more to the refugees arriving in Europe from Africa than to Africa. Many donors in Europe aren't interested in supporting congregations that are linked with the United States or Canada. We have been fortunate to receive legacies from graduates and friends of the brothers. We have to be able to do that with our friends and graduates in our African missions. What sense should we have of community today? Is it just the fact of living together, or isn't it rather the overall sense of belonging to the life of the group? Examples given were Mike Foley and Louis Calmel, and later it was added Bill Cushing, who for some time lived apart from the community, but were no less part of the community for having lived alone. And we have to celebrate them. They lived alone faithfully and with others faithfully. In our congregation, we are international and intercultural from the outset. There were years when we didn't realize this, we didn't put it into practice. We must consider these differences a blessing, a richness, and a blessing and not a barrier or a sign of division. For half a century, our communities in Congo and Kenya evolved separately, but similarly. And they even ended formation at the same time, quite independently of each other, it seems. For almost 20 years now, we have seen interaction and collaboration, and this is a necessity for any future growth in the two places. We need to intensify the collaboration. We have to encourage brothers to use their gifts, but not simply assign them to do roles in, or to play roles in other countries or in other places, if that is not the best way they can use their gifts. And we said much more than that, but that's the summary I came up with.
Would like to thank Patrick. Our particular group felt that he had given us much to digest and to chew over. In our discussions, we decided to sort of focus on the three areas that Patrick presented to us in terms of transformation, community mission, and finance and the option for the poor. I think our discussions began with the talk about transformation being a whole lifelong process, and for us as Christian people, the whole call to metanoia, to have a change of heart, to become another Christ, and to live out the values of the kingdom was significant, and this is something that is lifelong. And we talked about when we do this individually, it's a struggle, but when we enter into this transformation process on a communal level, it's much more of a struggle and harder to see results. One of the areas that we mentioned was that chapters, and one member had been to chapters, I believe he said, since 1977, but the chapters never make hard choices. They discuss things, they get to a point where hard choices have to be made, and he used the illustration of the last chapter in community, but then the group backed away. There was an expression in the group that hopefully our chapter here would be different, that we would take some significant concrete stances, particularly regarding the issues of shared leadership, the issue of oneness, the one village, the issue of interculturality, being intercultural, and the challenge again on a personal level, trying to deal with that, but also on a communal and regional, that there are different levels regarding this transformation process. One of the things that emerged in the beginning was a discussion of hospitality, and this being a concrete sign of the reign of God that we're called to as Christians, but also as brothers. And a discussion occurred talking about how difficult it is sometimes to move from one community to another community where there'd be openness to the hospitality to the new brother and the allowing of the new brother to bring his presence and his gifts, his talents and abilities to that community and to various ministries within that community. Again, they felt an encouragement for brothers to use their gifts and talents. With regard to mission, we began our discussion talking about the fact that community life, the topic of community life and mission, we began our topic talking about community life really starts in our family. It's there that we've taught to live with others and taught to live out community and the values of community, the caring, the communication, the sharing, and how too as we grow, the ego becomes a barrier to our relationship with others in our family. And certainly when we jump to community life, which is an extension of family life, that there are difficulties because of our egos getting in the way, and also because there perhaps were in our families areas that were deficient, were lacking, that we have to overcome and to recognize. Again, a missing link in terms of community was the emphasis I mentioned previously on hospitality and the relationship, too, between hospitality and collaboration. The struggles with collaboration within a community, within a ministry, in terms of use of our gifts. Below the surface lies probably a sense of competition. We might see this, too, in the areas of regionalism in terms of the congregation. We might say, well, they see it like this, we see it like that. Perhaps there's a need to reemphasize on need for conversion to become a band of brothers who help edify and assist one another and work together. And the collaboration part, the working together, is an area that is challenging for us as adults. The option for the poor, we talked about not just seeing things in terms of material poor, but other areas in terms of psychologically poor, spiritually poor, relationally poor, etc. The need for our creativity to go beyond money and funding of projects, to reach out to our brothers and sisters on the other levels, perhaps, that they feel needs in their particular area. We talked about the vowed life, and in particular the vow of poverty, and how our vow of poverty and our living in a common life enables us to reach out in mission to others, people who have needs that are taking care of our needs, but the extra monies in terms of our common sharing and our common lives, how that went into building in the United States the Catholic school system. And also we used the example of our mission to Orangeburg in the 1980s in South Carolina. It was a communal effort, and it came from our vow of poverty and our willingness to share with others. We felt that in terms of leadership, that there might be on the part of future leadership the need to raise consciousness of areas that we might be able to provide some assistance to others and their needs, to hear the appeal of other people, but also to hear the appeal of one another from needs that we see. There was a lengthy discussion about the notion of mission on the part of brothers from Belgium and the United States coming to Congo and the Kenya, that they came at a time perhaps when they didn't know what they were getting into. The challenges that they faced, basic challenges in terms of securing drinking water and food, etc. But the witness of the brothers and how important that was to the people that they served, and the fruits of that being seen today in terms of people that have stepped forth to join us because of the witness, but also because of the challenges, the sacrifice, and the hardships that our Belgian brothers and American brothers had experienced. There was some talk in terms of the experience in Kenya of the early American brothers in community coming over and their emphasis on community. And then the second wave brought the wave of more individuals and individualization. And we talked about perhaps this was an issue that we Americans brought with us in terms of the brothers going over. And that the work in the congregation at times, work begins to take priority over our life and our lifestyle as vowed religious. In the area of, no, that's it for ours. Any comments from the other members of the group? Thank you.
The last group, we're happy to say we had in our very midst as a leader, Patrick, who gave today's talk, in which we were very pleased to have him right there as a resource. I'm going to try not to be repetitive because so much of the conversation centered around the same areas. We did talk briefly about the time in the 19th century to establish a greater stability for the congregation. In response to those times, there was an adjustment to the structures and went into a more hierarchical direction as far as our mission, and somewhat misappropriated or gave less emphasis to the missionary character. And we were saying that in this time of Grace Crossroads, this is an opportunity for us to make a course adjustment and to give greater emphasis to the missionary spirit of the charism and figure out ways to incorporate that in our lives as we move forward. We spent a great deal, as other groups did, on the importance of community. Community based on deepening relationships, speaking honestly, and we even brought up the idea of brothers in community with deeper relationships truly are the mission. That brothers, and this goes to the past as well as to the present, that the brothers are referred to not by what they do as teachers or whatever, but who they are. And we can even enhance that, I think, by moving in a direction that would include internationality and interculturality where we can. With regard to the resources, we were saying that we really need to wrestle with our relationship with our resources and our money. There's a great temptation to move into a feeling of entitlement. And we've all experienced it to a certain extent, and being aware of that is imperative. We talked also about that led us into a discussion of the challenges of being called to serve the poor in the midst of the poor, and to realize that the decisions related to our resources now are definitely going to impact our lives and mission as we move into the future. So those are the areas, without repeating what other groups have said, that we came up with, or that we discussed. Anyone from the group that would like to include something else? Patrick? No.
Maybe it's God calling you.
Merci à tous les comités.
Thank you to all of the preliminary committees. We now have 30 minutes to perhaps react to the various reports we've heard, and to ask questions, and perhaps also to express anything we feel regarding the discussions this afternoon, this morning, around this whole issue about community and mission. And of course, there's also this question of human and financial resources. So a pretty free, open discussion. Please do try to be as brief as possible so the largest possible number of brothers are able to intervene in this particular debate. Thank you.
If I'm going to speak as a non-delegate, there were some points in Patrick's discourse this morning that I feel would elicit some reaction from a historical perspective, and my concern that we need some clarification. First, this very interesting line that we have all been struggling with, a band of brothers. Since I joined the Institute in 2001, I have been aware of the desire of brothers to clarify this phrase, one that you will see written by Riken in the plan as Article 60. But the best way to understand this phrase, in my opinion, is to return to the original phraseology of Riken, which was in his own Brabantian dialect. And I'm hoping that I'm pronouncing this correctly. Ein Band der Brüders. Ein Band der Brüders. But what's very fascinating is how Riken used this phrase, which is very rare at that time in the literature that exists. When he used the term brüders, he explicitly capitalized the letter B. What Riken was seemingly indicating was that his vision of the brothers is not simply a group of men that are bound by blood ties, but rather a group of men that are taking very seriously their identity as vowed religious. And what is very interesting then is that above the affective relationship that these men must have, in the vision of Riken, he wanted them to uphold first and foremost their identity as religious very seriously. And in this, Riken was very consistent, even up to the end of his life, during his frustration at not being elected superior general, when in 1864, he wrote an apologia to Bishop Malou of Brugge, in which he says, in spite of all this, this group must continue to remain as a religious family. The second is quite interesting, and that is the word band. The word band is seemingly one that was understood by Riken in his time to refer not to a musical group, but rather to a group that is bound together, committed to each other. And this will only make sense if we try to understand that in the story of our congregation, there was a time when we were not professing the vows as we knew it. What we were professing at that time were what we call the vow of admission and the vow of stability. But what was interesting was the vow of stability. The vow of stability is a document that you will find in the archives in Notre Dame as well as in Louvain. All the brothers took this vow of stability. And what was in that? It's a beautiful language because all of them made a commitment that says the following thing: I, the undersigned, hereby testify that as I bind myself freely and with full knowledge to the Severian brothers, I am aware that the congregation is binding herself to me. The understanding of the band of brothers is an understanding of men committed to each other and committed to the religious life that we have professed. This is the first feature. And there's much more that needs to be done to really understand this beyond our simplistic, the possibility of making a simplistic interpretation of what this is. But it's a very, very rich phrase in the story of our congregation, Een band der broeders. The second point that I'd like to raise is a problem that I had regarding the portrayal of Vincent ter Hoeven. Vincent ter Hoeven saved the congregation. Vincent ter Hoeven, if he had not been elected, the congregation would have collapsed financially. And to say that Vincent ter Hoeven was against interculturality goes against all the historical records that we have in Brugge, as well as in Leuven. Vincent ter Hoeven himself was not, Vincent ter Hoeven himself lived in an intercultural reality. The first communities of brothers were brothers that were of various cultures. And this is very important to understand. He was not against interculturality because that was the reality of the Institute at that time. The bigger problem, I think, for me, is a discernment question that was proposed regarding what would Ryken feel or what would Ryken say if he sees this. This is where I think I really need to react, because where the church is in its understanding of the founding charism, as I pointed out yesterday, is where we should be. It's not so much a question of what would Ryken have thought, but rather what would Ryken and his first companions have thought, and why? And why? Here is to me where the question is. The founder, as pointed out by the church, cannot be the exclusive interpreter of the originating charism. And why? Because founders are human beings. Founders are prone to become problematic. And, my dear brothers, we have a history where we know that so much as we love Ryken, we know that Ryken had authoritarian problems. The reason why he was removed from office in 1860 by the same brothers that he welcomed into the community, including the 8 surviving pioneers of the congregation, as concluded by Jan de Vader, and which I agree after looking at all the documents, was that the brothers really felt that Ryken by 1860 had become autocratic. And this is a very important issue for us to take into consideration. But what the beautiful thing, however, is this, okay? In spite of the fact that Ryken came across as autocratic, and as a result, they decided not to elect him as the first superior general, no brother ever disowned him and accepted him as the founder of the Institute. They loved him, but they could not see him continuing the office. In fact, at one point I was saying to our scholastics, as much as I love Riken, and nobody can doubt that I love Riken, I don't think I'll be able to be under him, because he was really quite tough. But here's where things are interesting. We own a history wherein part of the reason for the collapse of the life in common is the irresponsibility on the part of the person in the service of authority. And this is something that is quite fascinating. Terhoeven succeeded Riken and was the person responsible for the creation of the various provinces. But what's fascinating is that he also learned how to lead from Riken and began to also govern the way Riken governed. So this is something we need to take into consideration, because the life in common cannot happen if the persons that are in the service of authority in the community are themselves unable to be brothers to the brothers. The challenge, I believe, the first and primordial challenge in our congregation is to be brothers to each other, even when I am called to be in the service of authority.
Merci beaucoup, frère Régis.
Thank you, Brother Reg. I have a lot of admiration, for your perfect knowledge of the history of the congregation. But what I tried to say this morning, first let me say something else. I remember once reading a book in English, but I'll give you the title in French. It's called With the Heart Without Sharing. Avec un cœur sans partage. I can't remember who wrote that book, but I like the story. Because this is a book that talks about a girl who has a C grade in chemistry, I think. And so that pupil has to send a letter to her parents announcing that she has got a C in chemistry. But instead of doing that, she starts writing a very complicated story, saying, I was smoking with a friend, and because of that, we set fire to the school building, but that's the main story that I want to tell you, dear parents. And accidentally, I should also mention I got a C, So putting emphasis on a fake story to hide the real story. I think that's sometimes what we do here. We have to focus here on, the right message. If we stick to what Verhoeven said, and I said this morning that I don't want to criticize him. I am not a historian of the congregation. I just said this morning what I have always said and learned since novitiate times. My message is not that he should be criticized. My message is what Germain Kamwamba is saying. A lot of those who finish novitiate these days say the same thing, and have a message for us that we need to listen. Whatever decision is taken here is not just going to affect us here in the room. Let us not forget that what we decide here will mostly affect all those new younger brothers that are going to come after us. And as Germain said, those brothers-to-be are screaming, are shouting, are telling us something that we must hear. And we know that after initial formation, we all go back home usually. So we need to listen to those screams, to those shouts, and focus on the intercultural dimension of our community. I said nothing this morning about the stewardship or fundraising. I must admit very honestly that I felt not really comfortable doing that, which is why I focus most of my presentation this morning on the fact that we need to pay more attention to the poor. And that's all I'm going to say, but thank you, Reg, for your comments.
One of the things I have come to learn is that history has two consequences. One, it can either free us to see more possibilities, or sometimes it depends on the approach. It can also tie you down to see no options or possibilities of life. And one of the things that I have come to learn myself is living in communities can be enriching only if you are open to understanding other brothers. Because most of the time we expect brothers to understand us, but we don't expect yourself to understand them, and it brings about conflict. And so in my own way of looking at what brother presented in the morning is a way of opening me up to this intercultural perspective where I see each member of my community as contributing something unique, different from me, so that it frees me from being jealous, it frees me from being deceptive of one another in that particular setting. One of the things that have been a problem, or maybe I can say as a problem, is what you talk about autocratic leaders who are dominant to the point that those the community members look at themselves as contributing nothing, because this dominant person is always controlling and calling shots. So you are just there to say yes or no. One of the funny things with when we talk about resources is our brothers, are they trained to be receivers, or are they trained to be contributors? Most of the time we are receivers. We receive it, we spend it. And when somebody asks you, it's like, in our African sense, as I was sharing somewhere, when you are given pocket money for school, for example, your father will not come to ask you, brother, my son, can you account for the pocket money I gave you? We don't do that. That is your money. And so it is a ripple effect where brothers end up not seeing it as necessary when you give me a stipend and you are asking me for accountability. So it is a question of that history. Where am I coming from? Where am I, and where do I want to go? And the community should help me shape and reshape myself each year and each time I want to grow and expand in and develop myself within this sense of community. Lastly, maybe is about the resources of the community. I look at this model where we are in the community. I'm the coordinator of that community. I'm in charge of shopping. I'm in charge of doing everything. What are other brothers doing? They are sitting and watching me do it. Then when time comes for me to leave, I have not empowered them. And then somebody else comes to me and asks, can you be accountable for this? I have not practiced. I have no clue what I have to do, but yet I have to give something to the community. within that incapacities that I have. So I think going forward is that within every community, we have to empower each brother. Let each brother know what is going on, especially with finances. Let it not be swept under the carpet. Nobody knows what is there. Only I can spend as much as I can. But when you put everything on the table and ask brothers to be aware of it, it becomes much better in developing our own financial disciplines and also the option for the poor. Thank you.
I'd like to ask Patrick a question, if I could. You began your talk today by speaking about how as individuals we have to always learn anew who we are and remove the masks and become more who we are. And you said the same thing applies to a religious group like ours, that we don't need so much to relearn or rediscover who we are, we need to choose it. And I'm wondering what led you to make that point so strongly. What's behind your saying we need to choose our identity?
I think that it would be nice whenever there is a question, it would be nice to possibly ask everybody to possibly answer those questions. It shouldn't only be me, but thank you for asking me the question. I think I would understand the sentence as we do not choose an identity, we discover our identity. We were created by God, and God created us as good people, good persons. Father Philippe or Reggie Cruz, you're experts. I don't want to enter into a discussion on the original sin. I just want to say that my starting point is we were created good. But then we gradually evolve and we lose that humanity. That is the foundation of who we are and the foundation of Christian life. And it is the human being who becomes Christian, not the other way around. So there is something good in our humanity, but time passes and gradually we lose that goodness that is who we are originally, the goodness that God gives us. And by losing that, that's what I call wearing a mask, by the way. But by losing that, well, we see how this mask grows on us. And what we need to do is shed the mask and go back to our original goodness. And I think by doing that, we go back to God's original plan. You go back to being your authentic self. So that's the process as I see it. And I think that's how we can rediscover our original identity. So I like the term rediscovering our identity. I don't know if I answered your question. We are talking about resources, including money, financial resources, and I want to take the occasion here to thank the outgoing leadership team. Thank you for supporting us in the Congo. And thank you for also helping us to be self-reliant. I remember the last chapter. I was a member of the financial small committee at the time with Peter Scala, Dan Scanlon, I remember at the time we said, statistically speaking, by 2023 we'll be in serious trouble. And I see here that we've actually somehow done better than what we feared, 6 years ago. But I still remember Brother Larry's visit, when he said at the time, I'm not quoting exactly, but he said that some of us believe that financial problems do not exist, that this is a fiction, and that there is always money somewhere. Well, I remember him saying that. And I think this is an important sentence. We need to be more independent financially, to be self-reliant. It's easy to say, let's go and work with the poor, but you can't go to the poor with empty pockets. Right now, yes, we have money coming from the US, which is good, but we need to be able to be more self-reliant, to find our own sources of financing, and start maybe other missions in the Congo, but using Congolese money. Our American brothers are here to support us. But they won't be there forever. And it was a bit depressing on day one to hear the names of all those who have left us. And who knows who will still be around the table in 6 years. So I'm not saying you're all going to die, of course, but it's probably going to happen one day. To all of us. It's what awaits us all, but still. What I'm trying to say is that we need financial support. We still need it. And I think the various regions are probably much more serious today in terms of how we manage money and in terms of how we are gradually trying to generate our own sources of income. I think I'm very, very positively struck by the attitude of some of our elder brothers who now say, when people come for money, who now say, well, sorry, we can't give you that money right now. Which proves, I think, that we are aware that money is not, there. Yes, it can dry up. It can dry out, sorry. So we still need your help, and we still need that help, because with that money we can develop our activities, do things that not only will help us help the people around us, but also help our own brothers.
I'd like to add something to that. You raised a very fine distinction that the projections from the last chapter were a little bit more pessimistic than the results that have come at this one. And that is a significant benefit, both from compounding of interest in a very fine investment climate over the last number of years. If you remember, take back 6 years from now, we were just moving out of a significant economic downturn that cost us about 30% of our assets in 2008 and 9. And as I mentioned, we did a number of things to restore that, and we were successful because the investment climate was attractive, positive, and we made some very good choices. Not every choice you make in investments pays off, but we were guided by some very sharp people who help us, and we made good choices. The second thing that helped the current reality is very generous benefactors. We have collected several millions of dollars from benefactors, some of them brothers, who left family estates to us, as well as others that left their wealth in various amounts to us. And also the ongoing work of a number of brothers who still are active ministry being compensated. And finally, don't leave out the benefits that in Congo that you did in increasing from a very small percentage up to about 30-35% of maintaining yourselves on your resources. That is a significant benefit, and we don't want to underestimate that. And then finally, the projections that we make in doing this work are always very conservative. And for many, many years, I always pray that I'm wrong in the numbers and they're always better. All right? We've been very lucky that, in fact, that has been pretty much the case all along. And I hope it continues, because that has a significant benefit to us. But in the last 6 years, our expenses of operating the congregation in the aggregate have grown significantly. And within them, there are, I think, areas to question the value of the return for what was spent. So that's something to think about as we continue our discussion here. But we've been blessed with some wonderful things. And we just have to be careful. I'm not critical that we spent the money trying to do good things, but in making choices, we're going to have to be sensitive to the sort of the value of the return. I hate to sound just like a crass businessman, but in a certain sense, a nonprofit organization like us will not succeed very long if it doesn't pay attention to what it spends and why it spends what it spends.
I would just like to say that this microphone. Anyway, you're right. You're absolutely right. No, I think we owe a great deal of gratitude to you and all those connected with managing our finances. And thank God we have people who have, I would say, those managerial, I guess managerial skills. And the thing is, at the same time, I heard Brother Peter, I don't know if it was this morning or yesterday morning, said we've got to think about the systemic problems in the financial situations of all countries, and how we need to pay attention to this. So I hope we always keep in mind our interior well-being, that is to say, the management of our finances, so that we have the support we need to continue supporting the good, especially of the poor. And I was very pleased to hear, God, my memory is terrible. He just spoke. Patrick. Okay. Jesus. Anyway, it was towards the end of his talk. He talked about 97% of the wealth is held by 3% of the world's population. And this is what we have to keep in mind, both things. Our continuing ability to maintain ourselves, but we must, whether we're Americans who maybe in comparison live at a more expensive level than other brothers, whether it be Africa or Haiti. But at the same time, we have to keep in mind both things. Our continued existence to finance that, and also to always have within us that outreach spirit to the world, especially those on the margins. And we know that Jesus talked about that left and right.
Let me respond a bit to that. The concern that sometimes surfaces in work that I do, Arthur and others who might manage finances, is, oh, you're only concerned about the money. Maybe some days that's true. But I hope that a lot of the discussion centers around us making good choices. I'm not suggesting that somebody who is running a for-profit entity would make the choices we do. we put money into things that many others would not do. And those are good choices for which we have the resources to accomplish that. And so I think there's some real distinction. But the other part that you reference, and in my thinking over many years of doing this, is I know among us our rich brothers who have no clue that the barrel has a bottom. And we have to be sensitive to that. We have to look like families. In my family, my mother controlled the money. My father worked for it. He brought home the check, and I'll bet that's true of among some of you in this room. They had worked out an accommodation and understanding of how the family can succeed. We have to balance that as well. And so we have to be careful when we make choices. We also have to challenge somebody. Not every good thing is also going to be something we can support. There's a never-ending group of things we would love to do, but we're going to have to make choices. The world is so big and so poor. There's so many complications, and yet we're blessed with a lot of resources to do a lot of things. And systemic that you point to, it's much. If Jerry O'Leary is promoting some cause, that's not as significant to return as all of us joining to do the same thing. The systemic, the group brings a weight to the issue so that there's several. We do work with the poor. We also, as a group, support things that are hopefully changing the life of the poor.
Pardon. Nous pouvons nous accorder encore 5 minutes.
Another 5 minutes, is that okay?
Say I appreciate so much the sharings that the brothers are bringing out, and I'm not just sure if these good points that you are giving will be adapted or become part of us, because from my experience, maybe from the integration team, people give good points, concerns, but the problem is, to whom are we directing this? Because in my thinking, it is us that have to decide what is good or what is bad. And I feel like you can only solve a problem that you know. And from the expressions of the brothers, is like, brothers know where we are, they know our problems, they know our good acts that we have performed. So my worry is, who is going to respond to this and affirm that actually this is good and this is bad? Because I like, in my opinion, I would like a way whereby we move from one step to the next. If a brother is giving an opinion that I feel like we should do this, maybe what we should do is dwell on that point and see if it is good. We note it somewhere and say we are going to move with this. But if we just talk around and go to the next, I feel like not really wasting time, but let us just be we have finished this, we go to the next. Brother Reg tried to raise some concerns. I can't affirm that it's right, but I just feel like, why can't we approach that in a brotherly way and maybe ask him, because it's like he knows something that he would like to be changed, but I feel like you are not responding to him directly, but it's like we are blocking everything. Once we have that attitude, we shall be blocking another brother also to express what he feels that is not working. And from the email I read today in the, I think maybe Patrick posted or who, I think you say that within the 2 weeks, the brothers we are expected to come up with something that will affect the congregation for the next 6 or so years. So I feel like if we go with such a trend, we might reach the last day when we don't have a concrete thing that we can go and say, for the 2 weeks, this is the way to go. Otherwise, we might have stories and all those things that we cannot convince someone that we decided 1, 2, 3 things that will take us for the next 6 years. So that's my worry, and I think if I'm wrong, you correct me. But I feel that. Thank you.
I'm delighted that at 81, this is my last one, I'm delighted someone likes to come to results as well, and you're young, and you'll promote that going forward.
Merci beaucoup. Nous allons arrêter là.
Okay, I think we'll finish now. I think that in all of the chapters, there was some stage when you go backwards, then you go forwards, then go backwards, and I think all of this ultimately feeds into the decisions to be taken. And I think that, yes, certainly there is some hope that we will reach something concrete, but taking a quick decision without listening to people, without talking to things, without having these discussions, sometimes, you might regret that. So it's important to listen to one another. It's important to listen. I don't think we're going around in circles. I think it's almost like a spiral, which is then going to take us to a decision. And I certainly hope that in the technical committees, then we'll begin to make proposals which feed into decisions. But of course, ultimately, the leadership to be elected at the end of this 2 weeks will have ultimate responsibility for taking the decisions, I think, and following them up. So we're going to have a coffee break now, then you can go off into your sharing groups, and then we'll see you all tomorrow. Now, anyone feel that they absolutely have to say something?
I think that we need to at least give some thought of what Brother Simon has said. And I think his direction is not necessarily that we rush through decisions. What I perceive as him saying is that we need not to wait until that time to start making decisions. That is because we might run out of time at the end, and then we rush through, we put out things that are a raw deal. So is it possible that at least some things can be dealt with now as we move along?
Can I respond to that and to the extent that, if you recall yesterday, we were talking about approving, or the day before, approving the financial report, and I suggested, among others here, that we accept it and not make a conclusion regarding it. I think the same thing is true here. I may be the most impatient one in the room, but I think the pace is pretty good. And that we don't want to decide final things too quickly, and I think with the number of days left, we're in good shape. Unlike, I think, a prior chapter I was at, that we spent a fair number of days before we really got into this. I think the changes made this time were very positive, and getting us into it with lots of time along the way to pray and to think about it. Sort of a quick version of the last one was lots of praying at the beginning and then lots of work at the end, and was too quick. So I think the pace is pretty good, and if I'm happy with it, that's pretty good.
That's the measure.
Thank you, brother.